I can tell by your snickering.
Oh,
you
that
think
I'm
I'm
about
an idiot.
to
Yeah, just
disagree with every bit of that.
tell me why I'm being crazy. Welcome back to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Sarah Bedford.
Each week, we bring you the biggest news in politics, argue about it, and then you get to vote on a winner at the end of the show. Don't forget to like this episode, share us with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. It's election night here in D.C., and Above the Fold is focusing on these major races across the country, which will give us a big picture of how next year's midterms might go. So, Sarah, what's the state of play in these races, and are we expecting any unexpected results? I guess that's a little bit of an oxymoron, but lay down the business here.
Yeah, not to start arguing with you like immediately right out the gate, but I'm not sure that this will give us a huge picture into how the midterms will go. There's no open seats in these off-year elections that really favor Republicans in any way, and in fact, everywhere we're watching, New York City, New Jersey, and Virginia, we're talking about blue states, blue jurisdictions, and overwhelmingly Democratic electorates. So while we did 4 years ago have something of an upset victory when Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia, we don't typically see the party out of power, we don't typically see the party in power win in these blue states. The only time we really see Republicans succeed in the blue states is if Democrats are already in power, and this is sort of the only game in town for Republicans. That's not the case. So going into election night, we are expecting a Republican victory in the gubernatorial race in Virginia. Obviously not expecting Curtis Sliwa to pull off an extreme upset victory in New York City. Overwhelming likelihood is that Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist, will win there. The race in New Jersey is tighter, but I think the smart money would still be on Mikey Sherrill to pull it out. It is a blue state that Republicans still didn't invest a lot in. The only surprise we might see is in the Virginia Attorney General race, but again, I don't think that even that would say anything meaningful about the midterm elections.
Okay.
So it's obviously an off-year election, but it does seem that President Donald Trump, he's been all over the world lately, but not in Virginia and New Jersey, stumping for any of these Republican candidates. Why do you think he's staying out of it?
It's a little complicated, and from conversations I've had with some Republican operatives, obviously Donald Trump is the biggest draw in the Republican Party. You'd think he'd want to get out and try and help his candidates, but he's not on the ballot. And they're sort of viewing this as a test case for how do we gin up Republican turnout in the midterms in 2026. Because like you mentioned, control of the Senate, control of the House, that is not on the line tonight. But it will be next year. And Donald Trump has tons of money to spend. And this is how he's involving himself in particular. The Trump War Chest and the RNC, they are pumping money into targeted ad campaigns of Republican voters. They're not trying to flip folks across the aisle here. They are trying to see, can we effectively drive people to the polls when President Trump isn't on the ballot? And I actually would, object to one thing you would say just a second ago. I'm not so sure it is going to be a clear victory for Republicans in the Virginia gubernatorial race. And that's one of the reasons Trump has been on the sidelines as well. He hasn't campaigned in person, although he is doing a couple of town halls, tele-rallies with Republican officials in these final days and weeks. But the president doesn't like to attach himself to losing candidates. And even though Winston Earl Sears, she has been elected to statewide office before, Abigail Spanberger just had a huge lead on her in the final weeks of the election, although the gap was closing by a pretty significant margin. And I think the roughly 285,000 out of work federal employees who are still furloughed, the government shutdown is still ongoing. They're going to be the deciding factor in the Virginia race. And the president, he doesn't like losers. So that's why he's keeping his distance a little bit. That being said, and we'll agree to disagree on what this necessarily foreshadows for 2026. But do you think there's going to be anything we're talking about come Wednesday morning that is coming out of this election, but perhaps might not be focused specifically on the results?
Well, I think that Democrats, many of them, especially the more moderate ones in the Senate, have been quietly looking for an off-ramp to this shutdown, which in about 48 hours will be the longest in history, I believe. So one clear off-ramp for Democrats would be if they do in fact cruise to relatively comfortable victories in all of these races, they'll sort of have a narrative of winning that could soften the blow of what could look to the base like a capitulation to Republican demands to reopen the government without having the ACA subsidy situation worked out. That's a whole other bag.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a mess on Capitol Hill. And so Republicans had kind of hoped that maybe after the No Kings protests in mid-October, Schumer didn't want to be a burned in effigy at the march, so that he was waiting till that was behind him to orchestrate the off-ramp for his party. That didn't happen. Now there's some Republican optimism that on the backs of Democratic victories, there won't be this concern that reopening the government could depress turnout or anything like that for Democrats. And so beyond the results, which may not end up being all that surprising, that's the headlines that I'll be looking for.
That's interesting, yeah.
After the shutdown ends.
So the elections could shut down the shutdown itself.
Wow, that was clever.
We love to hear
so
it.
We did that
I'm
on
a
the
poet,
cuff, too.
and I didn't even know it. Oh, yeah.
Well, now it's time for Yays and Nays, where we give our takes on the other big headlines of the week. Sometimes we'll agree, and sometimes we will disagree.
Kash Patel should be the first Trump 2.0 appointee to be fired.
I don't know if he should be the first, but he's definitely going to be fired pretty soon. It seems pretty clear to me because, look, President Trump has made it clear he's willing to put any types of blunders or just, pure incompetence in the rear view if you are consummately loyal and you are not causing problems for him. It's one thing to be, a human meat shield and soak up all the negative headlines if it's, shielding the president from fire, so to speak. But if you're creating new problems for him to have to deal with and other members of the cabinet, your time is done. And let's take a step back for a second, because since the last episode, we've had a couple of notable, let's just call them terrible headlines for Director Patel. The first was this, quote unquote scandal where a former FBI agent turned podcaster was tracking an FBI private jet, which apparently Kash Patel used to fly from Washington, D.C. to State College, Pennsylvania, home of the world-famous Nittany Lions. My wife is an alum, so I got to shout them out. But he took the jet to go watch his girlfriend sing the national anthem before a wrestling match.
Not a great look.
Not
the
a
best
great
look.
use of taxpayer dollars. That being said, FBI directors are, by law, not allowed to fly commercially. Again, that's a different story. But the way that Patel reacted was really surprising, because he kind of had a tantrum on social media. He lashed out at the TDS crowd, of course, but he also sort of threw some Republicans and, quote-unquote MAGA allies under the bus for, not defending him and not, backing the FBI and everything they're trying to do to carry out the president's agenda. And not a great look. And if that was the end of it, sure, fine. That being said, Friday morning, Halloween, he tweets out, the FBI has done great work. We've foiled a terror plot in Michigan, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that sounds good, right? Except just a few hours later, the FBI came out and was like, actually, there was no threat to public safety. And the attorneys for these, teenagers, because I think they're like 16 to 20 years old, all these guys who got rounded up, they're basically saying, like, we have the receipts. We're talking about video games. What is this? So again, just egg on the president's face because of Kash Patel. And let's not forget, this is after all of the Epstein stuff. This is after he sort of bungled the rollout of information in the immediate aftermath of the terrible Charlie Kirk assassination. So I just think the writing is on the wall for Kash Patel, and he's going to be gone sooner than later.
I'm going to go nay.
Love that.
I'm going to go nay on should he be fired.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
For one reason only, and that is because he was a controversial choice to lead the FBI at the beginning of this year. But it was a time when Donald Trump had maximum leverage on Capitol Hill. He had just won a surprisingly comfortable victory. And there was this sense, even among moderate Republicans, that perhaps Donald Trump should be entitled to the cabinet that he wants at the beginning. That's a presumption that traditionally was given to presidents.
Yeah, exactly.
Any incoming president, regardless of party. Obviously, in today's hyper-polarized environment, you don't always see that. But that was a time when Donald Trump was likely to get his most MAGA guy in at the FBI. That presumption won't be there when he needs to go fill the FBI role. And at this point, you're talking about a confirmation fight that would happen in an election year. It would happen among amid the midterm races where you have moderate Republicans like Susan Collins in Maine who are up for re-election and who are not going to want to walk the plank to confirm a MAGA 2.0 guy at the FBI, especially when the Trump administration's line on Capitol Hill was like, just trust me on this, guys. We need Kash in there.
Yeah.
And Republicans fell for that once. So if you put someone else in there, you are probably looking at someone who's more like a Chris Wray type, who was a company man, lots of experience, turned out to be a massive disappointment for Trump and his supporters. I don't know that you could ever get anyone in there who sort of represented MAGA interests the way that Kash Patel was supposed to. That being said, you mentioned that Donald Trump doesn't like it when people create headaches for him. I would actually disagree with you a little bit here then.
Go off, Queen.
Oh, thank you. I will. So what I think is that as long as the cabinet member is successfully and competently delivering on Trump's agenda, he is okay, he's tolerant of a certain amount of funny business in the press, right? If you look at someone like Pete Hegseth, who has brought up recruitment levels for the Pentagon, he's brought up morale significantly among the ranks of the military.
He brought back using Signal for government employees.
He sure did. That is not on my list of good things he did. But Donald Trump was tolerant of that super embarrassing Signal thing that he did. He's tolerant of embarrassing headlines like building his own makeup room in the Pentagon, or implementing a press strategy that made everyone walk out and was like weeks of unnecessary, unflattering press. But Pete Hegseth is delivering in a way that Kash Patel is not. So you can't go out and be embarrassing and do a bunch of nonsense like with the private jet and everything, like accidental fake terrorism plots, if you're also not delivering. And I think there's a real sense among the administration and also MAGA supporters that Kash Patel is not delivering. There's not the level of transparency there on things like the Arctic frost investigation.
Yeah, glad you brought that up.
And other things that MAGA thought, here's a one-man wrecking ball who's going to come in and clean house, and an FBI that was inarguably politicized for years. And he's not really doing that. So the embarrassments aside, he's not the MAGA guy that everyone had hoped and prayed he would be. I still worry that the alternative, though, would be much worse for the MAGA folks.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, there's no guarantee that, the president's, second first choice or even his third first choice would get confirmed because, like you had mentioned, it will be in an election year. And the Senate's already starting to play hardball with some of these remaining nominees that are lower down the totem pole, and just not doing everything that the president said, like they did when they confirmed Mr. Patel or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or any of those folks. That being said, it's now time for us to fill in the blank.
Nuclear testing restarting is a blank decision.
I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I'm going to say it's kind of a terrifying decision. And if you haven't been paying attention, when the president was in Asia, ahead of this big summit with Xi, he tweeted out, essentially, well, I guess he posted on Truth Social, that the U.S. is going to restart nuclear weapons testing because he claimed Russia and China are both building up their stockpiles. They both have greater arms capabilities than we do right now. And it's a kind of a strange turn from someone who we've been told is supposed to be the president of peace. And on its own, I wouldn't be as worried about this if the president wasn't on the verge of knocking off a couple of countries in South America, if he wasn't potentially escalating the actual arms that we're providing to the Ukrainians through our NATO allies. The Pentagon last week cleared the way for him to actually start sending Tomahawk missiles, which of course is something Ukraine has been asking about for about 2.5 years or now. And it feels out of Congress with what we saw through early last month, which was the president securing all these peace deals, bringing about a ceasefire in the war in Gaza. And I feel like he's backsliding a little bit because of what's happening with the war in Ukraine. And one thing we didn't hear out of the White House following that meeting with Xi was, did you ask the Chinese president, like you told us, to step in and convince Vladimir Putin, again, someone who are, really their only one-to-one allies on the global stage, to end this war and take Ukraine's concessions, which are expansive, a significant amount of territory. And we didn't hear anything about that. So it makes me wonder, like, how committed to this peace agenda are they really? Everyone talks about peace through strength. This seems to me like a president who is kind of throwing a temper tantrum and threatening to not necessarily take his ball and go home because the kids don't want to play with him the way he wants to. He's just going to blow up the ball with a new hyped-up nuclear weapon. So I'm a little terrified. I can tell by your snickering.
Oh,
you
that
think
I'm
I'm
about
an idiot. Yeah, just
disagree with every bit of that.
tell me why I'm being crazy.
Okay, here's why you're being crazy. So all of the things that you listed as Donald Trump having done successfully, primarily the peace deal in the Middle East, that's a result of Donald Trump sort of breaking free from the foreign policy establishment thinking that has underpinned U.S. foreign policy towards a lot of these issues, including all 4 years of the Biden presidency, when it was very much like a middle-of-the-road blob thinking traditional approach to the Ukraine-Russia war, and nothing happened. In fact, the conflict became even more of a stalemate because of the thinking that went into that. And part of why Donald Trump has had so many diplomatic successes, I know his critics, potentially including yourself, wouldn't want to give him that, but through his first term, Abraham Accords, that sort of thing, and to now, is because he's approached these issues differently and always with this sort of air of unpredictability for allies and adversaries alike. They don't know what he's going to do next. And that sort of changes the calculus in terms of negotiations, which, like it or not, Donald Trump is a pretty capable negotiator. It's clear that at times in the talks over the Ukraine war, Donald Trump has misjudged the intentions or the sort of hand that Putin is holding.
Sure.
But this to me doesn't seem like some sort of insane escalation, at least not with everything we know right now. You know, the energy secretary has kind of walked it back. He's like, no, we're not blowing stuff up. We're just like firing up the computers. We're testing out the systems.
Yeah. Well, Chris Wright even said we're trying to advance the systems themselves, not the actual warhead. So there won't be mushroom clouds over Nevada, which reassuring,
Don't worry,
guess,
guys.
a little bit. Yeah.
So all of that to say that this seems like part and parcel of the Trump playbook so far, which is to sometimes throw crazy things out there to get everybody paying attention, but in ways that often meaningfully move the ball forward towards his end goal.
That's fair. I mean, again, I can't really disagree with you, and this is ultimately when you're talking about, advanced world-shattering weapons systems. I think a degree of skepticism is fair, but I would agree with you. And, even during his first term, I think the Abraham Accords, what he did to normalize relations with Israel and some of the other, or not the other Arab nations, but Arab nations in that part of the world, is probably the most successful part of his presidency, and even one that, again, his critics can look at and say, okay, things could have gone significantly worse. I hope he is doing what you're saying and just trying to carry a really, really big stick. But I'm sure we'll be probably talking about this one again next week and the following weeks after. That being said, we've gone over time this week. Don't forget to let us know in the comments who you think took home victory in this week's clash. Like the episode, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and in the meantime, go check out more great reporting at washingtonexaminer.com. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Sarah Bedford.
And we'll see you guys next week.